Dubbed as being the evilest duo in Britain, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley kidnapped, tortured, and brutally murdered 5 children in just the span of 2 years in the 1960s. The twisted couple would lure children into their car before bringing them to Saddleworth Moors near Manchester, England. This was their preferred burial ground for their young victims and would eventually become the reason behind the infamous nickname in the case, the Moors Murders. So how do you get not just one, but 2 willing participants to commit such heinous crimes? Well, Myra Hindley would tell you herself that she was also a victim and was beaten into submission to be Ian's accomplice. But this doesn't seem to be the case when you unravel the details. Listen and form your own opinion. Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you for joining today. If you're new to listening here, hi. I hope you and yours are doing well. If you are a returning listener, been here a while, I love you and your whole face. Not part of it, but the whole thing. Okay, that got a little bit weird. Well, if you are in fact new, please subscribe to 10-Minute Murder where you're listening right now, and in the future, episodes will be easier to find. You won't miss any of the stories, your skin will become radiant, and your crush will finally ask you out. And hey, if you haven't already done this, do it now. Connect with the podcast on social media. You'll see the visuals that go with the episodes and a whole lot more. What? The website. Harper Jane, my dog, she wants me to remind you to go to 10minutemurder.com if you're interested in 10-Minute Murder t-shirts. JK, she didn't really say that for obvious reasons, because she's asleep under my feet. All right, now let's get to today's story. Born in Glasgow, Scotland on January 2nd, 1938, Ian Brady was a troubled young boy. It was reported by several authors that had researched his past history that he tortured animals for fun as a child. Before the record, Ian says that these accusations are untrue. When he was a teenager, he was called to juvenile court twice, once for breaking and entering, and the other for being charged with 9 counts of assault against his then-girlfriend. And what did she do to trigger Ian? She decided to go to the school dance with another boy, not named Ian, and he threatened her with a knife. As for Myra, she was born on the 21st of July in 1942 in Crumpsall, Manchester. It was reported that she grew up in a repressive and impoverished household, where her alcoholic father would often beat her and encourage her to use violence to solve life's conflicts. When she was just 8 years old, her father threatened to beat her if she didn't get revenge on a boy who had scratched her cheeks and drawn blood. Myra confronted the boy and punched him until he was knocked to the ground. She later wrote in her diary, quote, "At the age of 8, I scored my first victory." In January of 1961, Myra began a job as a typist at Ian's place of work. They both described this moment as love at first sight. She was 19 at this point and he was 23. And despite his criminal records, Myra became obsessed with Ian. On their first date, Ian took her to the cinema to see a movie about the Nuremberg trials. He was fascinated by the Nazis and often read books about the German language, as well as Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler's manifesto. After learning this, Myra became interested too, and they would read each other passages from Nazi books on their lunch breaks. How romantic. Myra's attire changed as well, and she began replicating the Aryan ideal. She bleached her dark brown hair blonde and wore thick crimson lipstick. On their lunch breaks and dates together, the pair began discussing their fantasies and wishes. They realized how they both wanted to live a life of crime and commit robberies to make themselves rich. But they quickly realized that just plain old petty theft was not what they were daydreaming about. They wanted to take the life of another human being, a child to be exact. On July 12, 1963, the pair spotted 16-year-old Pauline Reed walking to a school dance. Myra claimed she lost an expensive glove and needed help finding it. Once she was coaxed into their car, Ian drove to the moor, where he sexually assaulted her and slashed her throat twice from behind. He then buried her in the desolate area. Just 4 months later, they would commit their second crime. On January 23rd, Myra approached 12-year-old John Kilbride. He was in a market, and she offered him a ride home. After he was in the car, Ian and Myra told him they needed to make a detour first. Back at Saddleworth Moor, Ian sexually assaulted the young boy and attempted to slit his throat with a serrated blade, but failed. He then strangled John to death with a piece of string, and the two buried him in the ground just as they did Pauline. Their next victim, Keith Bennett, was walking to his grandmother's house on June 16, 1964. The boy was lured into Ian and Myra's car. This time, though, once they arrived at the moor, Myra kept watch in the car, while Ian did to Keith what he had previously done to Pauline and John. The sadistic couple would take a more sinister turn in December of 1964. Filling their victims' final moments with terror wasn't enough for them anymore. They wanted to relive the deaths of their victims over and over again by recording them. Their fourth victim would receive the cruelest torture by far. Ian and Myra found 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey walking alone at a fair. Myra asked Leslie if she would help unload some groceries from the car, and innocent Leslie was happy to help. They didn't take her to the moor, though. Instead, she was driven to Myra's grandmother's house, where she was living at the time. In the basement, and unbeknownst to the grandmother, the pair undressed, gagged, and tied up the 10-year-old. She was then forced to pose for photographs, and then Myra recorded her for 13 minutes straight as Ian assaulted her. She cried for help and begged for her mom. After the torture, Ian strangled her to death. Finally, the brutal killing spree came to an end in 1965, but at the expense of one last victim. Ian was now living with Myra in her grandmother's home, and the two became close with David Smith, Myra's brother-in-law. One night, Ian requested that David pick up some wine and come over to the grandmother's house. Once he arrived, David witnessed Ian mercilessly beating a 17-year-old boy with an axe. That boy was Edward Evans, yet another victim coaxed into trusting Ian and Myra. In an attempt to add another sadistic monster to the circle, Ian asked if David would mind helping move Evans' body and clean up the horrific crime scene. Out of fear of being the next target of the axe, David agreed. However, he was able to leave, and once he got home, he told his wife, Myra's younger sister, Maureen. They both went straight to the police. On October 7, 1965, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were arrested, and the horrific torture was put to an end. Initially, they both maintained their innocence, but after David's cooperation, a suitcase containing incriminating evidence was found. It contained photographs and the recordings of Leslie Downey's murder. A notebook was also found in Myra's house with their victim's name, John Kilbride, scribbled on the pages. After searching further, the police found a photograph of the couple at Saddleworth Moor, so they searched that area and discovered the little bodies of Leslie and John. Edward Evans' body was also recovered from Myra's home, wrapped in plastic sheeting. Pauline Reed's body wasn't found until 19 years later in the moor. Unfortunately, Ian and Myra never revealed where Keith Bennett's body was buried, and he has never been located. Ian was sentenced to 3 concurrent life terms, while Myra received 2 concurrent life terms with an additional 7-year sentence for the murder of John Kilbride. Myra claimed until the day she died that Ian was the mastermind and beat her into submission. However, this is widely accepted as being false. She died in prison in 2002 at the age of 60. Ian was 79 when he died in 2017. Although the Moors murders were over half a century ago, their disturbing mugshots still haunt the internet, reminding you of their horrific crimes. Judge Fenton Atkinson, who oversaw their trial, describes the pair perfectly as, quote, 2 sadistic killers of the utmost depravity. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. A quick reminder about 10minutemurder.com. If you go to 10minutemurder.com, you'll find all things related to 10-Minute Murder. Social media links, merchandise, some of the best places to listen, stuff like that. If you want to send me an email, you can send it to the new email address, joe@10minutemurder.com. That's brand new, and the very first person that sent me an email there, once I got it up and running and mentioned it on this podcast, they wrote, "Hey Joe, love the show and thanks for making it respectfully funny, especially when dealing with such a dark topic. It seems strange that those two things go together, but they somehow work. Anyway, you haven't mentioned in a while what you're drinking during the podcast. Is it because you had that rough breakup with Coke Zero? We need to know. Thanks for what you do, AW. And for anyone that doesn't know, the rough breakup with Coke Zero, they changed the color of the can from black to red, and I didn't like that. It's super petty, but I will have you know that I have had Coke Zero since then, and it's fine. It just tastes different in a red can. I don't know why, I can't explain it, but it does. I still drink it from time to time, but I don't know why people want to know what I'm drinking. It's never anything fun. Today is probably the most fun, and it's not even that fun. I'm currently drinking a Diet Pepsi, and I've taken the vanilla syrup, the vanilla syrup that you can flavor your coffee with. It was right beside where I was making my drink, and I was like, hey, I wonder what this would taste like inside of my Diet Pepsi. So I spilled a little bit in there, and it tastes like a vanilla Diet Pepsi. It's pretty fantastic, but that's what I'm drinking. And that's it. I don't know why people are interested in what I'm drinking, but there it is. Thank you for listening to 10 Minute Murder. Be safe and make good choices.